Hello everyone, welcome to Computer Graphics Lesson 1. In this course, we're going to be learning about computer graphics, specifically through the use of an application called Unity. Essentially what we're going to be doing is using Unity to develop our own apps and games, which we'll explain in future lessons. So, what is Unity? Unity is a development game engine and software that are used for creating games and interactive visuals. And rather than being like a coding language such as Python and Java, it is a whole like application that allows you to build your own games from essentially scratch without having to do all the work that um, other softwares require you to do. Why should we use Unity? Think the biggest advantage of Unity is that it's very easy to use. As I mentioned before, other languages such as like Python, Java, JavaScript, all those languages, they take a really long time to learn and they rely on the user having a lot of knowledge about both the programming language and how they're going to use that programming language to do what they want to do with it. However, Unity is a lot simpler and it comes all packaged into one program that you can use to do essentially whatever you want. Another benefit of Unity is that Unity comes with a bunch of pre-made tutorials that have been released online and inside the app. So if you're ever stuck with something or you want to find a new project but you don't know how to get started, you can always refer back to those tutorials and they will explain everything in very like high detail. Okay. One reason that Unity is used widely like among advanced game developers is because of the various like features that it supports. And like one of those major features is virtual reality and augmented reality. And essentially what those two are is rather than just using the application on your computer screen, which is obviously 2D, you can view the application in 3D as well, which allows the user to create apps such as like architecture simulations, animation, 3D modeling, physics simulations, and like a plethora of other topics that like I can't even think of right now. Lastly, Unity is really good because it's honestly just really fun to use. With other languages, you're spending a lot of time struggling and trying to figure out why what you're making isn't working. But with Unity, everything's like provided to you, and it's very iterative, right? Like you can start with basics, and as soon as you've mastered those basics, everything else comes really naturally because everything just builds on top of what you already know. There's no like really fancy concept that you have to learn before you're able to use it. Everything is just like automatic and intuitive. So now we can start getting into how to download and use Unity. So I'm going to be giving my tutorial for people on Windows laptops, but it's a very similar process to Mac, and everything should just carry over really easily. So what you want to do is go to Unity, just give me a second, unity.com. Go to the products tab at the top, see all products. There should be an automatic selection of the Unity personal plan, and once that's selected, you can just click download now, and download for whatever version you have. I have a Windows laptop, so I would click download for Windows, and that starts the download rate. I've already downloaded Unity on my computer, so I'm going to cancel this, but you guys should just get that set up like as you would any other program, right? Once Unity is downloaded, you're going to want to open this application called Unity Hub. Unity Hub is essentially where all of your projects and code is stored, and this is how you're going to open the Unity application to modify your projects in the future. Once you have Unity open, the Unity Hub open, you're going to be welcomed with this page. there's going to be a list of projects that you have. These are likely going to be all empty projects. I mean, and this list is probably going to be empty because if you're downloading Unity for the first time, I doubt it's going to give you a project that you've already made. Before we move on, we want to make sure that we have the latest version of Unity installed. So to do that, you're going to navigate over to the left-hand side where it says installs. Click on that uh, and go to install editor. And this top row where it says LTS, that means long-term support, which means that that release is stable and will be continued to be developed into the far future. And for me, this box is grayed out, meaning that I've already installed it. It should also be grayed out for everybody that just downloaded Unity because Unity downloads with the latest version installed. If it's not grayed out, I would go ahead and click the install button right there, and it's going to take you through a couple of steps and should be downloaded within like 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. So once you have the latest version of Unity downloaded, that's 2021.3.10f1. You want to go back to the projects tab and click create a new project. Once you click on that, you're going to see a really long list of different types of projects you can make. Like as I was talking about, there is the VR and AR projects, and there's like first person, third person projects, mobile applications, 2D mobile applications. There's a lot of options, right? For now, we're just going to stick to the default. It should be selected already, the 3D core. This is essentially just a very, very basic template where it gives you like two objects placed in the original scene, and everything else is left for you, the user, to modify and create. So once that's selected, you can go ahead and give your project a name, say like computer graphics lesson 1. I've already created a project, so I'm not actually going to go through and create this, but you could call it whatever you want. Then just click, you can then just click create project. I wouldn't mess with the location in the project unless like you really know what you're doing, because if you change the location where the project is saved, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to find it in the future, and you might not be able to do some of the things that you're going to be required to do for our lessons. So once you have everything set, you can go ahead and click create project. That's going to exit this page and create a project for you. Should take like 5 or 10 minutes to load. Once it has loaded, it's going to take you to this page. This is the very basic Unity home page. It's where you can edit every single part of your application. Like you can move around to the scene view, you can look at the inspector, the assets, the hierarchy. Everything is available from this page. Before I move on, I would like to define a few terms that I've been using a lot. So the first thing is a scene. What is a scene? Essentially, a scene is just any um any screen in your application or any like area inside your application. So like if we take the example of Tetris, Tetris has like three main scenes, right? There's the first scene where it's like the start menu, where you can click create a new game or play online competitively or look at your stats or achievements, stuff like that. That's one scene. Another scene would be the actual game where like the blocks are falling down and you have to click buttons to rotate them to make them fit together. And another scene would be the end screen after you lose and it shows you how many points you got. So that's what we see here. This is one scene of a project. We can switch between scenes by going to this folder at the bottom. Currently I only have one scene created, so I don't really have anything to do here, but that's just where we can find other scenes if we do create them in the future. Another vocab term is objects. An object is essentially just exactly what it means in like normal English language. Basically just anything inside of your scene. So if you look at my screen, you can see that there are two objects currently inside of my screen. There's this thing that looks like a camera over here, and there's this icon that looks like the sun. So This camera looking thing is a camera. It is a camera object. And this sun thing is a light object. And you can see on the left side in the project hierarchy, there's a list of all of the objects that are in the scene. So if I click on the main camera, it shows the main camera. If I click in the directional light, it shows the light object. Now onto the actual Unity user interface. I've already gone over this a little bit, but this is the project hierarchy in the top left. It shows you where all the objects are located. At the bottom, you have kind of a file explorer for your project where you can find all the files associated with your project. So that includes game objects, scenes, scripts, everything to do with your project, essentially. So that's really good for finding things once you create them and referring back to them in the future, right? You can also find the game view, which is essentially what the user will see once they download your game and start playing or open your application. That's what the user sees, right? So this is really useful for making sure that what the user sees is what you want them to see. And we're going to switch back between the scene and game view really often during our lessons. Then finally, on the right-hand side is the inspector. You will notice that it's empty right now because I have not selected any objects. But once I select this camera object, for example, it gives me a lot of information about the camera and I can adjust some of these settings. Like I can move the camera to the right and left and I can move it up and down, stuff like that. So I'm going to set those to 0 for now. So that's the inspector, and like I can do the same thing with this object. So that's a very basic rundown of the Unity user interface. And now we can move on to actually playing around with creating objects and modifying objects within the interface. So to create an object, there are a couple ways that you can do it. The easiest way and honestly the most reliable way to create an object is to go to the project hierarchy and click on this plus button. By clicking on this plus button, you will see a list of different types of objects that you can create. Like I could create an empty object, I could create a 3D object with a bunch of templates that Unity provides me. I could create a UI object like image or text or like a button inside the application. Or I could have like a camera object. There's a lot of different options that you are allowed to like mess around with. I actually encourage you guys to create a bunch of these objects, see what each of them does, see what they look like, and see how they show up on the left side in the hierarchy. So for now, I'm just going to create, let's say, a cube object and a UI text object. So while we wait for that to load, we can take a look at the inspector on the right hand side. Let's select the cube object. When I have the cube object selected, you can see in the inspector the cube shows up because that's the name that's given to it in the project hierarchy. There's also a lot of information relating to the cube. There's its tag, which is right now untagged because I haven't assigned it anything, but I could assign it a bunch of tags if I wanted to for my game. There's layers, so like which layer the cube is on. Again, I can mess with that however I'd like in the future. More importantly, by clicking on the cube, I can change the position, rotation, and size. So if I wanted to move this up and to the forward, like towards me, I would drag on this green arrow up and drag this blue arrow towards me. You can see how it moves away and towards me as I do that. So now this would be like in the center of my screen. I can also do this by sliding these buttons, just hovering over the X, Y, and Z labels and sliding those. I can also change, sorry, I can also change the location of this object by changing the values directly. So if I wanted to put this to the origin, I'll go to 0, 0, 0, and you can see the cube moves to the center of the image, like the origin of our scene. Another thing we can do with this cube using the inspector is rotate it. So again, I can do this in two ways. I can either slide these sliders, so I can like turn it that way, turn this that way, and you can see the axes have also shifted, so the arrows are no longer pointing in the cardinal directions. So when I just move one of them, you can see all three of these numbers will change. And also I could set this to be like 45, 45, 45 manually as well. And now the cube is pointing in the in the four or whatever, all the corners of the scene. Lastly, what we're able to do is to change the size of the cube individually. Right now, the scale factor is set to 1, 1, 1, meaning that the cube is at its original size. But if I wanted to make this a really long and flat rectangle, for example, I could set this to be equal to 5 and set y to be equal to 0.1. And now you can see how the cube is obviously no longer a cube, it's a rectangular prism, and it's flat in one axis. So along the y-axis, it's very squished, and along the x-axis, this red arrow, it is very lengthened. I did not change the z-axis, so obviously the z-axis still shows a scale factor of 1. That's a basic overview of how to use the Unity UI. I encourage everybody that's watching to create a bunch of objects using this plus icon and mess around with their scale, mess around with what they do. Like you go ahead and move the camera around and then look at the game view, see what that does. But yeah, I hope you guys were able to understand everything I covered. Let us know if you have any questions. And I'll see you later.